Welcome to MGB Tech Tips, presented by Fred Humberstone Multimedia. Follow along with Episode 2 as I show you how to fix a broken captive nut. The procedure that follows will work for any tack-welded nut that has broken free from the bodywork on any car. In the process of refurbishing the interior of my 1978 MGB Roadster, it was necessary to remove the top to access and remove the interior trim panel for restoration. As I was removing the bolts that secure the tonneau rail receiver, I heard the nut attached to the interior of the inner body panel fall down into the body cavity. This happened several times as I removed all of the bolts for both receivers. Once the interior trim panels were removed, I used a telescoping magnet to fish out 2 of the 3 broken nuts. Inspecting the nuts, I noticed they were held in place by 3 microscopic welds which had failed. To complete the repair, I used 2 types of epoxy, rubbing alcohol, and a new 1/4 inch by 28 threads per inch nut to replace the nut not found. Using a medium to fine grit piece of sandpaper, I thoroughly cleaned off the surface of the body panel where the broken nuts were attached, then wiped the surface clean with a rag dabbed in rubbing alcohol. Placing the broken nut on a bench vise, I used a fine wire wheel on an electric drill to clean the surface being reattached to the body panel. The new zinc-plated nut required additional preparation. Using the flat side of a grinding wheel, I carefully ground off the zinc plating, exposing the raw metal, to better bond with the epoxy. I also reinstalled the tonneau rail receiver using 1/4 inch by 28 threads per inch bolts into the remaining captive nuts. This will help to locate the replacement of the repaired nut in the correct position. After cleaning both the original and new nuts with rubbing alcohol, I mixed a small amount of the 2-part epoxy paste and, using a flat toothpick, applied a small amount of the epoxy to the surface of the nut that will bond to the body panel. I placed the nut on the back side of the body panel and installed another bolt through the receiver and body panel into the nut, making it just finger tight. Do not over-tighten this nut and bolt. If you make it too tight, you will squeeze out the epoxy and will not achieve a good bond. Giving the repair a few hours to dry, I then went back and cut off a thin sliver of the epoxy stick, quickly kneading it in my fingers until I achieved a consistent color, then took little bits of the epoxy to apply to the flats of the reinstalled nut, creating a fillet of epoxy around the base of the nut to the body panel. This epoxy gets hot and hardens quickly, so I set only 1 nut at a time. I let that cure until the next day. Placing one hand inside the back of the body panel to hold the reattached nuts in place, I carefully used a wrench to remove all of the bolts holding the receiver in place. You can now see the repaired captive nut in place. With that accomplished, I was then able to successfully reinstall the restored interior trim panel, the tonneau rail receiver, the seat belt, and the convertible top. It looks great, doesn't it? Well, of course it does. And yours will too. Thank you for watching MGB Tech Tips, presented by Fred Humberstone Multimedia. If you would enjoy seeing more of these free videos, then please click on the subscribe button.